Get used to saying no without explaining yourself. It'd be great if we could do this on demand without experiencing the emotional manipulations other people throw our way when we refuse to do what they want us to do. We've all done it. We've said yes to things we wanted to say no to. We've pretended to like what other people like just so they like us more, and we've capitulated in the face of other people's dominance for fear of upsetting them. There's a word for this you might have heard before. It's called self-sacrificing. We distrust and dismiss our own thoughts and emotions in favour of other people's, at the expense of ourselves. And mostly, people try to get us to do what they want by using the most toxic word in the English language. Do you want to know what that word is? Quick reveal. 3, 2, 1. The word Alejandro, get out of here, you devil. The most toxic word in the English language is the word should. You should do this. You shouldn't do that. You should do what I want you to do just because I want you to do it. Lewis, why is this word toxic? It's because it implies a social obligation we didn't agree to. So, this is what we're going to cover within the next few minutes of your time. We're going to start with exploring why we capitulate to others. We're then going to move on to self-differentiation and congruence, 2 psychological theories which will help us understand this further. Then we'll cover the 5 traits of the self-differentiated person, because this is the ideal we're aiming for. And then we're going to finalise by covering the 3 ways to become more self-differentiated, otherwise known as being able to say no when you actually mean it. Number 1. Why do we capitulate to others? The word capitulation means the act of ceasing to resist an opponent or demand, and it comes from the medieval Latin word capitulatus, meaning to agree to surrender to an enemy. In the context of relationships, we might capitulate to parents who want us to study a degree we have no interest in, capitulate to a pushy salesman to buy something we don't actually want, capitulate to the neediness of our partner to text them where we are 24/7 when such requests actually make us feel like a child, or capitulate to the peer pressure of our friends to go to a music event we don't want to go to. When we capitulate, Brilliant. We're now out of blue. When we capitulate, we submit, and we do so to avoid the potential conflict that could arise from us saying no. All of which creates tension in our relationships where we feel inauthentic to be who we really are. One of the reasons we capitulate to other people is due to the nature of how us humans are raised. Think about it. Jimmy here is dependent on his parental figures until he's about 18, because he's a vulnerable little sod and he needs protection. From a young age, we are dependent on our parental figures, so we naturally enter adulthood without learning the skills of how to differentiate ourselves and our thoughts, emotions and opinions from those of other people. And worse yet, we enter adulthood with all of the experiences we had of our early parental figures, projecting them unconsciously onto other people. To give you one example, let's say you had a domineering and aggressive and assertive father when you was younger. You might then project that ideal onto your boss at work when he demands you have to work longer today. Suddenly you crumble in the face of, in reality, another human being, but it's tougher for you to deal with, and you capitulate because it reminds you of this early experience with your dad. This unconscious reliving of our childhood experiences in adulthood creates a psychological mismatch where our childhood programming and our adult programming are unaligned. After all, it would be easy for someone to say in this example, Jimmy, why don't you just decline your boss's demands that you have to work longer when you don't want to? Because in our eyes, his inner child is always out of view. Now, this doesn't explain everything, and I'm not going to psychoanalyze your mind, but the point is, the more we can start to understand why we capitulate in the face of some people rather than others, we start to distance ourselves from our inner child. But capitulation isn't always a bad thing. Wait, I'm trying to draw a mouse. This is what happens when you put me in a room by myself trying to draw a bloody mouse. Okay, the ears are the problem. This will all make sense in a moment. Mice, lions. But capitulation isn't always a bad thing. For example, in their book, Rapport, The 4 Ways to Read People, 2 forensic psychologists, Emily and Lawrence Allinson, personify the character of capitulation as a mouse and that of assertiveness as a lion, and they both have good and bad sides. For example, a good mouse is humble and lets others lead. A bad mouse, however, is too timid or submissive. A good lion is decisive, bold, direct, clear, and a good leader. A bad lion, however, is bossy, tyrannical, and controlling. To illustrate this, let's imagine you invited me to your hometown, and the day after, you had planned an excursion to show me around the city centre. Now, in order for you to do so, you would have to become a good lion, and I would facilitate that by becoming a good mouse. Because If I try to become a good lion by showing you around somewhere you've already seen that I've never been to before, that would actually be me being a bad lion. So understand, capitulation as a whole isn't a bad thing, because in the right context, it's a very good quality to have. Just before we move on to the 2 psychological theories which will help us understand this more, there are 2 more manifestations of capitulation. 1, codependency, and 2, fusion. Codependency is when we become overly reliant on someone else, needing them to fulfill every need we have. And fusion is when we intertwine our identity with someone else completely. Think about the girlfriend and boyfriend who can't not do everything together. One principle a friend taught me, which has stayed in my mind ever since about fusion, is you should be adding to someone's life, not becoming their life. The core fear for the person who's codependent is they fear individuality. And it's the same for the person who is fused. They might turn to their friends, partner, or family to determine how they think or feel about a certain issue. Now we've covered the understanding, now let's get into what we can actually do to say no when we mean it. Considered the grandfather of family therapy, Murray Bowen coined the term self-differentiation to refer to our ability to separate our thoughts and feelings from those of others. In essence, it involves a setting apart of oneself as distinct from others. In the context of family, self-differentiation is when you start to free yourself from your family's collective psychology in order to define your own individual psychology, respecting you have your own values, thoughts, opinions, experiences, and feelings from those of your family members. Whoa, a random big list has appeared. In order to determine how self-differentiated you currently are, let's go through these questions together and I want you to answer them yes or no. Okay? Introspection brains on. Number 1. Do you mostly work on letting go of problems rather than solving them? Do you let feelings fester until they explode? Question mark. Do you say what you know others want to hear? Do you agree to things you have no interest in doing? Do you demand, directly or indirectly, praise and compliments? Do you seek to control others instead of controlling yourself? And lastly, do you concern yourself with the needs of others while discarding your own? If you answered yes to most of these questions, we've got some work to do. Self-differentiation is a way of being where you're able to affirm yourself without harming or cutting off the other person. The self-differentiated person also resists getting caught up in other people's emotional problems that deal with their anger, resentment, and deep-seated issues. They're still able to empathically understand other people, but they're also able to understand other people's problems and not theirs. I remember when I was 16, I started learning about positive thinking and laws of the universe and all of that stuff. And I remember I was sat in a classroom one day with one of my good friends at the time who was the most negative person I've ever met in my life. And we were sat there and he was offloading all of his emotional turmoil onto me, all of his disgruntled thoughts. And for the first time ever, I felt this force field around me where I could listen to him with an understanding, but not feel drained after the interaction, because before I would have absorbed his energy into mine. Jesus Christ, that was a bit spiritual. I should have had this on my head while I was saying that. But this force field, for a lack of a better word, is what you start to experience as you increase your self-differentiation. Because think about it this way, it's like a volume button that you use to turn up yourself. Also giving you the understanding that your relationships are a living organism with 2 individuals involved. It's very easy, if you're the type of person who overly capitulates to other people, to snap out of this perspective and think the relationship is all about the other person. But it's not. It's a living, breathing organism that is dependent on 2 individuals bringing their energy and self-differentiation to the relationship. It's a cliche, but it takes 2 to tango. You see yourself as an active participant in your relationship. A participant who, if their needs and wants go unnegotiated or unmet, will result in the relationship not being able to flourish. In the words of the psychotherapist Dr. Lisa Firestone, who's written extensively on the topic, a person with strong self-differentiation is able to set appropriate personal boundaries without feeling guilt or shame. A person with poor self-differentiation goes running to accommodate others, often at the expense of their own happiness, comfort, or time. So the person with low self-differentiation says yes to others when they mean no, just to prove themselves as good children, spouses, friends, or colleagues. However, by becoming more self-differentiated, by saying no to others when we genuinely mean it, we give ourselves the opportunity to say yes to ourselves. And most of the time we realise saying no to others when we genuinely mean it is never as life-threatening as we think. In the words of Naval Ravikant, if you upset someone because they have an expectation of you, it's their problem, not yours. An important caveat to mention here, because I can hear your keyboards typing already, you keyboard warriors, saying, Lewis, but if everyone was self-differentiated, then no one would care about each other. Yes, I hear you. Remember, self-differentiation doesn't mean we sever our ties with other people. You have the same amount of respect for the other person as you do yourself. It just means you turn up that voice you have long kept quiet. Allow me to elaborate one final point further by explaining a concept from the psychotherapist Carl Rogers. Rogers believed in order for any relationship of any sort to flourish, both people had to enter the emotional arena without a facade, whereby they created an environment of congruence. Congruence involves a harmony between three things: your experience, your awareness of your experience, and your communication of your awareness of your experience. For example, incongruence would look like this. Lewis, how was this evening? Did you enjoy it? Yeah. Oh, yeah, it was good. Looking forward to next week, yeah. So this term we keep using of turning up yourself involves these two parts: your awareness of your experience and your communication of your awareness of your experience to other people in full honesty. That was meant to be an arrow. Not sure what happened there. A quick language tip for when you're communicating your emotions to other people: don't communicate your emotions as facts. Instead of saying, you're really annoying, say, when you do that, I feel annoyed. Don't say, you're completely wrong. Say, I feel irritated by what you're saying. So now we've covered all of that, let's finalise by covering the 5 most common traits of the self-differentiated person and the 3 tips you can use to instantly become more self-differentiated. The first trait is a solid sense of self. Self-differentiated people prefer that others see them accurately, meaning they will maintain their thoughts and beliefs in the face of pressure from other people to conform, nor do they turn down themselves to avoid conflict. They might not like conflict, but they prefer, well, hold on, we'll get into that. Number 2 is they seek understanding rather than agreement. You understand you're not always going to see eye to other people, so your self-differentiation involves not wasting your time trying to get other people to agree with you. You don't keep the peace for the sake of it, and if there's a problem, you try to resolve it as quickly as possible. Number 3 is an ability to self-validate. We all want validation from other people in some way or another, but self-differentiated people are able to validate their own efforts. And the non-self-differentiated person would tailor their efforts or behaviour in order to get validation from other people. Hence, gimme compliments. Whereas self-differentiated people would tailor their behaviour so they could become better friends to themselves. Number 4, and my favourite one, they have an ability to self-soothe. Self-soothe is your ability to regulate your emotions. Interestingly enough, self-differentiated people don't rely on substances or external things to help them feel a certain way. What they do is they regulate their emotions themselves through adopting responsibility for how they feel. They don't seek other people to help them feel a certain way. What's more, they don't change other people to help them feel a certain way, because their toolkit of things they can use to help them alter their emotions at will is what they rely on. And lastly, trait number 5, they are able to tolerate short-term pain for long-term growth. Self-differentiated people are able to take a step backwards in their conversations in order to take 2 leaps forward, otherwise known as embracing conflict now to resolve problems, to then further the facilitation of the relationship flourishing. Now let's finalise with the 3 things you can do instantly to become more self-differentiated. Tip number 1, increase your willingness to self-confront. It's easier to say no to something when doing that thing would go against your values. So here are all the pesky buggers saying you should do this, you should do that. Say no and you'll realise it's a lot easier to make the decision when you've got your values behind you guiding your decision making. For example, if you value honesty, then not speaking up when something irritates you would be a direct transgression of that value. Consider this equation from my boy James Smith. Something I want to express times my personal values equals saying it unapologetically. But in order to figure out what your values are, you need to first introspect. Above my head appearing somewhat now should be a video on how to do that. It's only 6 minutes. Feel free to check that out. But as a rule of thumb, I find that the HERE principle that they outline in this book, rapport, is a great value standpoint for any relationship. Honesty, empathy, autonomy, and reflection. Reflection, hold fire on that because in the conversation video that is upcoming, we'll cover that. But autonomy is the key one here. If you value autonomy, you allow other people to do what they want to do, and you likewise. Number 2, don't change based on who you're with. Showing your authentic self to other people can be quite a daunting task if you're not used to doing so. But quick thought experiment for you here. Would you rather people approve of a facade or your real self? Secondly, experiment. Although this isn't a video dedicated to social anxiety, one of the ways people can overcome their social anxiety is by experimenting with doing different things in social interactions. For example, what might happen if I hold eye contact with someone? What might happen if I don't cover my face when I blush? What might happen if I don't rush to fill a silence? Then they realise, oh my god, people don't kill me when I look them in the eye. People don't call me out when I'm blushing and not covering my face. And lastly, people are more than comfortable with silences. So the next time someone asks you to do something you don't want to do, see what happens if you just say no without providing any explanation. Or the next time you're at a social gathering and you can't be bothered to be there anymore, see what happens if you just get up, say goodbye to everyone, and leave. Without evidence that despite your most pessimistic thoughts, your self-differentiation doesn't lead to death, you'll struggle to break free from your overcapitulation. And finally, we're on the home straight, boys and girls. Almost there. Think long term. Many people live in the status quo of unhappiness for years in their relationships. Hence, they go to therapy and rant to their friends instead of tackling problems head on. So the next time you're faced with a relationship difficulty you'd usually let slide, consider what would happen if you don't address this thing right now. If you don't tell that friend how their behaviour is irritating you, you're going to have to experience that behaviour for the remainder of your friendship. If you don't address how your partner doesn't greet you when you come home from work every single day, then for the remainder of your relationship, you're going to have to experience a cold greeting every time you walk through the door. You don't have to like conflict. I certainly don't, and I know many people who are good at it who also don't like it. You just have to prefer short-term conflict to delayed volcanic eruptions of conflict. A good principle I learned from one of my friends is your relationships are only as strong as your willingness to have difficult conversations. And lastly, because one more thing has just come into my mind, dissect why you struggle to say no, because I guarantee there's an underlying belief that is holding you back. Perhaps you think that when you say no to other people will see you as lazy or selfish. Replace these thoughts with these. Saying no is an appropriate adult response of someone who respects their time and exhaustibility. Saying no is a powerful thing required of a balanced person. People who are realistic will accept a no, and lastly, people respect those who say no. And if you're the type of person who makes decisions too quickly that you later regret, give yourself some rules. If people offer you to do something and it's not a hell yeah straight away, say, I'm going to take some time to think about it. In summary, capitulation is where we submit to other people. There are good and bad sides to capitulation. Think about the mouse. I'm not going to draw it again. And the lion. A good mouse is humble and able to let others lead. A bad mouse is too timid or submissive. A good lion is able to be direct, decisive, and a good leader. A bad lion is controlling or tyrannical. Self-differentiation is where we realize we are different from other people with our own unique values, thoughts, opinions, and emotions. It also involves a turning up of yourself in your relationships, recognizing yourself as an active participant while maintaining a connection to the other person. The 5 most common traits of the self-differentiated person are a solid sense of self, seeking understanding rather than agreement, ability to self-validate, ability to self-soothe, and finally, tolerating short-term pain for long-term growth. And to finalise, the 3 tips to become more self-differentiated are: increase your willingness to self-confront by getting your values behind you in your decision making. Number 2, don't change based on who you're with. Remember, prioritise people seeing your authentic self than a facade, and experiment. What might happen if I just say no without any explanation? And number 3, think long term. You don't have to like conflict, you just have to prefer short-term conflict to delayed, bigger conflict. That was a psychological one. Let me know in the comments if there's anything else you wanted me to elaborate on that I didn't. Stay disciplined, playful, and do not draw mice on a whiteboard if your name is Lewis Course and dangerous. Adios muchachos y muchachas.